Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, thanks for coming to my channel and visiting. I appreciate it. If you would, before you leave, would you hit the like button? That helps me a lot if you could do that. And check out some of my other videos. I think you'll find my channel has a whole lot of content, lots of project ideas, quite a few tips. And especially if you're a beginner, this might be a good channel to subscribe to. I'm putting out 3 videos a week. Check those out and subscribe. A special thanks to my patrons over at Patreon. I wanted to give a shout out to Typhonus or Typhinus. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but thank you for signing up to my Patreon. I really appreciate your support, and I also think you got a cool name. So if you're interested in that, you can check out the links in my video description down below. There's a link to my Patreon page, as well as a way you can just kind of tip me if you like what I'm doing here by buying me a coffee. So check those out. Let's see, the other thing is I have a website if you want to see kind of the stuff that I make here for sale. Let's see, I think I'm on the wrong side. Go ahead, I'll put a link up here for you. Okay, enough shameless self-promotion. Today I wanted to make a ring that is sort of inspired by the rolling ring, and if you want to see that, I have a video about how to make one of those. But I'm going to use that concept in order to create a decoration around the bezel for this ring. And I have this really pretty Ethiopian opal that I picked up at the last show I was at, so I think we'll use that as a stone. So stay tuned, and we'll get going on that one. Let's get this show on the road here. So I wanted to show you the opal. This is a beautiful Ethiopian opal. It's I'm always nervous when I'm setting opals because there's always the risk that you'll break them. They're a little bit delicate. I'm trying to move it around in the light so you can get see some of the color in it, but it's pretty. It's probably, let's see, about how big? About 11 millimeters, and it's a round. It's also kind of a deep stone, which is nice. Got lots of that color play going on in there. All right, so the materials we're going to use. Well, let me talk about the ring first. So if you've seen my rolling ring video before, you know how you can interlock 3 rings together so they kind of roll onto your finger. I was going to do the same thing with some round wire around the bezel for this stone, and then maybe do a little more than just a plain band, do something a little different with the band to show you a different technique. But this one makes me a little nervous because, as always, when you do opals, there's always the risk of damaging it. So, and this was kind of a pricey one, if I remember right. Before we start the bezel on that, I will talk about the materials. So I'm going to use 14 gauge round wire for those rings. For the band, I'm going to use some of this 8 gauge half round as well as a little more 14. I'm going to do an open back on this bezel because I tried it, and I do this with a lot of stones, is, you know, set it over the top of what it's going to be against in real life, like on someone's skin, versus what it looks like against a piece of silver. And I honestly thought it looked better on the skin. It brings out more of the colors in the opal. So I think I'm going to go with that and leave it open backed. And in order to do an open back, we need to put a little platform on there for the stone to sit on. So I'm going to use some 18 gauge round wire for that. And then, as always, I use generally 28 gauge thick bezel. I normally use 3/16 inch tall fine silver, but this time, since it's such a deep stone and there's some things I want to do as far as the decoration, specifically those rings going around it, which are going to raise up a little bit, I need a lot of room to work with, so I'm using 1/4 inch this time. So the first thing we'll do is make a bezel for this. I use my pick to make a little scratch in the bezel. With bezels, we always want to leave just a little extra. I usually suggest about the thickness of the pick. That leaves me a little room for filing, so I get a bezel that's about the right size. Generally, with a stone like opal, if I'm setting it in a ring, I I tend to tell people that this is going to be a special occasion ring, not kind of an everyday ring, because certainly opals don't stand up to wear and tear as well as some other stones, and they can be very expensive to replace. As always, I use hard silver solder in sheet form. Just about right on size. I'm going to make a little circle to create a step for the stone to sit on for inside of the bezel. For that, I'm going to use 18 gauge round wire. I usually just freehand these circles, but if you want to do it around a mandrel or a bail making pliers or round nose pliers or whatever you have that helps you to make circles, that's okay. I like doing it this way so you can overlap them like that, and then I can change it up or down size-wise pretty easily just by kind of scooting it closer together or pulling it further apart. Then once I'm pretty close, I'm going to cut it a little bit big and then gradually snip pieces out until it fits in there perfectly. I'm also going to make sure it sits real flat while I'm doing this. So I knew this was going to be too big at this stage, but it's easier to take stuff away than it is to add stuff in. So we just gradually remove it until it fits in there perfectly. That's pretty good. You want it to be just snug enough to stay in there and have the two ends of the wire touching each other so you don't get that embarrassing crack down below. Okay, and the easiest way to solder these in is to just take a few pieces of the hard silver solder, put it underneath after we flux this, heat it around like you would a normal bezel, and it'll just draw it up in there. Let's file this bottom a little flat. Okay, so now I had to think to make these triple band rings. Typically, if you're going to interlock the half round wire to make into a ring that rolls on like that, it ends up being about 3 sizes bigger that you have to make each individual ring because they overlap each other and that subtracts the size. So I'm hoping it's the same way if we use round wire around this. It'll be about 3 normal ring sizes above it, and that's how I measured. So what I did was I took a strip of paper like this. I didn't do that. I dragged this along until it curled like that, wrapped it around the stone, and I marked where it met right there. And then I measured the distance between about size 1 on the band and size 4, which is 3 ring sizes. And I added on about that much, which was about that much right there. So that's what I'm going to try for, and we'll see how they work as far as the size. So it'll be a good experiment. We're doing it for science. Okay, so I'm going to cut 3 pieces of 14 gauge round that long. Sometimes you got to do a little trial and error to find out how things are going to work. Okay. I'm just going to use this to measure. And then I can just cut 2 more using this as the guide. We just passed 1,600 subscribers. I'm very pleased with that. Thank you guys for coming back and watching stuff. Let's straighten them to make sure they're all pretty close to the same size. It's getting ahead of myself a little bit there. I think that's close enough. So I'm going to go ahead and make these into 3 rings. And since they're small, I'm going to do it around this. So the interesting thing about making these rolling rings is that you could make the rings initially perfectly round, but I make, in order to get really good solder joints, I make rings not round first to solder them like this, and then after they're soldered together, then you can round them out really nicely. And you can't do that with a rolling ring, so I have to do something where I repeat a step, kind of, and that is solder them together, round them all out so they're nice and round, and then I'm going to cut 2 of them right on the solder joint, so I won't have to refile or anything. I can just solder them right back together without changing the angle or anything. It makes it pretty easy. Remove any excess solder on the inside especially. Getting a little overzealous in my filing there. So I think with these ones we're going to be a little bit too small for the ring mandrel, so I'm going to do a little bit of manual shaping to start with, and then we'll find a way to round it out a little better. If you had a jump ring mandrel, that would be useful at this point. I think the one that I have is too small for this. So it's a little bit too small, but I can still get it near the top here. If I hold it against here and tap it with my plastic hammer and rotate it wherever there's a high point. Normally I would have this braced against something, but if I brace it on the table, it'll make terrible noises through the base of my camera holder here. Okay, so here's my plan. These ones are just big enough to fit over the tip of my ring mandrel, and so I should be able to hit downwards and stretch them out quite a bit. So I'm going to move them up maybe to a size 2, and let's see where it's at. Let's go with that size. If I can get all 3 of them up there. That ended up being 3 1/4, so I need to help me remember that here. Okay, so I stretched them all out a little bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to write on the solder joint on a couple of them, I'm going to cut with the jeweler's saw just right through there. So right here is where I'm going to go. See, normally I'd do this on a bench. This is not best sawing practice. I'm just doing it so you can see what I'm doing. Alright, so what we're going to do then, I tried to make sure they were relatively flat a minute ago. But one by one we're going to interlock them, so I'm going to put those two over. This is the one I didn't saw. Put those together so they're pushing together a bit. Make sure they're still lined up this way. We want to set this over here, and preferably you want this to not be sitting on a piece of solder because we're going to try and solder this one. We don't want it to accidentally solder to that. So it looks like I have enough solder there. Little piece here. If I actually hit the solder joint right, I probably could just do it without adding solder, but just in case. The other one you want to go through both of them, like that. And again, I'm going to try and position these such that nothing is going to accidentally solder to itself. So my solder joint's right there. Solder this guy closed. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time cleaning up those solder joints again. That's kind of how it's going to go. Let's see if this fits. Wow, look at that. It fits. It's a tiny bit loose, but see how that goes. So I think just prior to putting this all together, I'm going to use the Dremel with some of the finer polishing bits to make these a little nicer so that they look good already before we solder this all together. So I clean them up a little bit with the Dremel, and we could kind of get this guy lined up and we'll see what we can do. When you're getting your little triple band lined up, make sure you have the rings in the way that they all lay nicely together. If they're not laying like that, take one of them and flip it over the other way, and that should take care of it. Alright, well, let's just try it. Never made one like this, so it'll be kind of a fun experiment. What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, probably the worst thing that could happen is that we crack that open when we're setting it. Hopefully we don't, though. I want to have quite a bit of solder here because there's a lot of surface area between all of these rings and the bezel. And I want to make sure that there's enough solder to connect them. Okay, got lots of solder fluxed up. Let's give this a try. I'm just going to gradually add solder in until it stops moving or anything. Just looking for any gaps that I might have left. I think the best way is to let it clean up a little bit so I can see how it looks. So I'm going to toss that in the pickle for a bit. In the meantime, start working on the band. I was thinking about making this one like a 7.5. So I'm going to measure what I would normally measure for a 7.5. About right there. And then since this is going to be going to either side of the underside of the stone but not meeting all the way, I'm going to probably end up deducting a little bit of this. So I'm just going to go ahead and knock a little bit off right now. And we'll measure there, and then we'll cut it shorter if we need to. Half round wire. This is 8 gauge. And then we'll use this guy to measure a couple of pieces of this 14 gauge. I'm just going to make a band that has a middle part that's wider and rounded, and edges that have 14 gauge square wire bordering it. Having trouble today articulating my words, so I apologize for that. Maybe I didn't have enough coffee today. So we're definitely, once we have this assembled, we're definitely going to be polishing the ring before we set that stone, because I wouldn't dare bring that stone near a polishing wheel. I like opals, but for what you have to pay for really nice ones and how delicate they are, it's sketchy, and I get nervous about spending a lot of money on opals, because if I broke one that was really expensive, I would just about die. Round wire, if it doesn't roll when you put it on the table, it's not straight. That's pretty close. Let's get this guy to lay flat, make sure he's straight. That's pretty good. Not too bad for internet silversmith. Okay, I'm just going to get him lined up here. It's not sitting great flat. I'm going to try and find a little flatter spot. That's pretty good. Okay, so we probably got enough solder over here. I'm going to dribble some from above here so I don't disturb it too much. Let's get it nice and crusty. That's pretty crusty. One of the few disciplines where crusty is good. You could just lay some pieces along here if you wanted to. I'm just so used to pick soldering. Seam all the way down. I'm just going to add a little bit more just to be safe. Looks like we got a pretty good seam on both sides. Cutting these off to exactly the same length. And just to start, I'm going to go ahead and start bending it around the mandrel, but down low where it's small. Down here near the lower side. Periodically flip it over to deal with the taper. And as you start to move down, you can use the hammer if you need to. So right now it's coming to an 8, and I want to pull it a little closer together so that I can get it to end up dropping and staying there. So I'm going to cut a little bit out of here. I have that view. See how it drops right to 7, or 7.5, I should say. Okay. Now let's push that other thing out and look at it and see how it looks. It actually looks pretty good, I think. So, since you can see how that if I soldered it, if I soldered down on like this right now, it would project into the hole here. So I'm going to have to cut it down a little bit. So I'm going to cut another piece out of there. But I'm not going to change the size. I've already gotten it to the right size. So I'm just going to snip a piece out. I'm starting to get in the range where I want to be. So, and what I'll do is after I get this soldered on here, I'll either take the Dremel or I'll take my file and file it so it's rounded, so it doesn't cover any of the hole that goes through it. So I think I'm going to leave it about there. But I think I'm going to file it flat a little bit on top here. I think for this one, I don't want any of these guys to move at all, so I'm going to push it into this softer, it's called a magnesia block. Okay. That way, if anything, which it probably will, reflows a little bit, none of this will drop to the top of the bezel, so we should be golden. So I'm just going to try and line this up nice. There's likely enough solder in all of this stuff to actually solder it down. I'm just going to add some to make sure I get a good seam here. Oops, I dropped my ball. I dropped the ball. I just wanted to add a little bit more on this side to make sure we got it really on there good. Okay, well, I think we're pretty golden there. Or silver in this case, I should say. That's a dad joke. I don't know why that looks off center. I don't love how that's sitting, so. Oops. I'm going to try and move that a little bit. So I got a little bit too far to that side, so I'm going to try and slide it over. See if I can do that or not. Trick to doing something like this is you got to get everything liquefied again. Otherwise it's not going to move. Okay. So yeah, because if you get this side liquefied but this side's not, it's not going to move at all for you. So you got to get everything really flowing. We had success that time, I believe. That's a little better. Okay, we'll let him cool or pickle for a while. And then I'll come back and show you how to set the stone and finish it up. Got that polished up. I'm going to go ahead and set the stone. And we'll see how it looks in some final photographs. Now when I burnish this, I'm going to try real hard not to hit the stone. Okay. There it is. try and get a better picture of it, and I'll put it at the end of the video. All right, that was the rolling ring inspired bezel decor ring. I'm not sure what we're going to call this one yet, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave, and I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel. So again, if you're interested in supporting me as an artist or just want more interesting content, check out my Patreon. And if you just want to support me in another way, buy me a coffee. There's links to both of those in the video description. So thanks again for watching. Happy silversmithing. Take care.